Hey everyone, Coach Patrick here from Endurance Nation. Today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about my recent race at Leadville, the 100 mountain bike edition, not the run like those crazy runners, but the mountain bike edition, where I was able to go sub 9, put up an 8:52 in my first attempt, and literally my fifth ride on a mountain bike, not going to lie. And there were a couple of key secrets that allowed me to do that, and I wanted to share them with you today. They're not the super sexy secrets. So if you're here for super sexy secrets, please click to the next channel. That's not going to be it. What you're going to learn here are some of the foundations of how we work inside the team, how I work with athletes, some of the principles that set us apart. And then also just underlying all of this is the support of my teammates. What we do inside Endurance Nation is gather a community of athletes who are seeking their personal best and doing it which means that we're sharing our lessons, we're sharing our insights, we're sharing our race experiences. We're training together online, we're meeting together for training camps in person all over the globe. It's a phenomenal environment. And really, that was truly the accelerant that allowed me to be my best on race day. There's really no way that anyone who's going to Leadville for their first time really have an understanding of what it means to bike to 12,000 feet all the way out there from Leadville to Columbine, or what it means in terms of what happens to your body, how you're supposed to fuel it, pacing, terrain, conditions, all of those things. It's crazy. And so I'm going to break down some of the fundamentals so you can understand that whether you're looking to go to Leadville or whether you're looking to have your peak endurance performance at an event, particularly a new event, here's the process that I use to go through it. And I've got it on my screen. I'm going to walk through it here today. So just bear with me as I do this. Okay, so here we go. First and foremost, here we go. I'll make it a little bit bigger here, cracking the code. Okay, these are the 5 topics in chronological order. Number 1, early season volume. Number 2, researching the race. Number 3, my pacing plan. Number 4, resting into the race. And then finally, nutritional excellence. All of it comes down to, at the end of the day, your race is about race execution. And we have that inside the team on the 4 keys. If you go to endurancenation.us/4 keys, you'll see the resources there. You can actually sign up and get a free download, me talking to you about our general principles of race execution. What I'm going into today is more specifics on Leadville. And I think it's super important. Okay, so number 1, my season really kicked off with volume. Those of you who know me, who've been following me since I started as an athlete in 2001 doing my first Ironman, and an athlete long before that, that putting in work and time is not my problem. I love training. I love training indoors. I love training outdoors. It doesn't matter what it is. I love training. I really have a tough time sitting down. I am making a huge sacrifice right now, sitting in this chair here in Steamboat to talk to you because I just hate sitting down. And so the training volume isn't a problem, but I had to think about how I was going to structure my training volume. I live in the Northeast. I can only train indoors. What does it look like? And I used a great deal of time. And if we head over to my training calendar here, you can see January, February, March, April, all the way through August now. And you get a general sense of how the volume played out. There's a couple key things that I do want to talk about here. So you can see in general, starting in January, you can see the build, right? So consistency, a peak, a rest, stepstone consistency, a peak. These are training camps in here where I went to both Mallorca and Tenerife to do some extra time. And then consistent training here across the middle block of the summer, which is like building up to volume, recovery, building again. You can see the progression. It's very straightforward. Many of you have seen that before. But there's some elements of the training, which I'll get into a little bit later, that are important. But the foundations that I want you to understand here is that there was quite a bit of work that went into the early part of my season that really allowed me to be successful. And spending the time to do that aerobic conditioning is very important. It doesn't all have to be one sport. It doesn't all have to be cycling. If you have winter sports, if you enjoy running or any sort of multi-sport thing, but if you have high aspirations for a tough endurance goal, you have to be ready and willing to make sacrifices early in the season to put in some consistent training. It's not easy to go into a block and say, hey, I'm going to go down to the basement and ride 3 or 4 hours here in February or March on a Saturday or a Sunday. But if you have those high aspirations, you have to put in the time. The closer you get to your race and the more time you put in, actually, the less likelihood you're going to be successful on the day because you're starting to carry fatigue. You're not having any time to adapt or learn lessons from your nutrition execution, from how your body deals with that stress, etc. And there's also evolution of fitness over time. So we want to start off in the winter putting that in. It's a very safe time box space where we can use indoor training as a tool to make you successful. And so I did a great deal of that inside this space. Okay? And it's super important in terms of how things went out for my training. And it started there. Okay. And one of the ways that I did the volume that was a little different this time that I want to talk about, maybe some of you have heard of Niels van der Poel, who's a world-class speed skater, won the Olympics, has won world medals at the 10K. He's already retired. He's super young. But he had an interesting training methodology, and you'll see it show up inside this space here. And it surfaces again as well. You can see that there's blocks of a little bit of rest in here. So as I go through the process, but you can see here as well, these are days. So what you can see here is 5 days rest, 5 days rest, 5 days rest, 5 days rest. For the month of March, I followed Niels' approach which is essentially outlined in his manifesto here as being 5 days of work and 2 days of rest. And that really hit home for me early in the season, and that I needed the rest. I was finding that I couldn't do the work if I wasn't rested enough. And there was a balance. Like I was able to do work, but the quality of the work was deteriorating over time. That's a theme that you'll hear throughout this brief presentation. But I really started to feel it here in this pocket. So I was like, how do I do work and rest? And so I was getting up super early, sacrificing some sleep, which is not great, to put in this time into the just before workday started so that I could work and then take the weekends off. And actually, from a family perspective, this is a huge win. I had all the family time I wanted. Normally, it's the inverse, lots of training time on the weekend, family suffers. This is not the case at all. So I was able to do lots of stuff on the weekend, hang out, be relaxed, and it was good. It did make for a super stressful and tough Monday through Friday work week. And I was only able to hold it for the month of March. But I do believe that it was a really important block of time that carried me into April and May, where I did some training camps out to Mallorca. When I went to Mallorca, for those of you who follow me, I did 700 miles in 7 days on the bike. And I followed that by going to Tenerife and then doing Vuelta al Fide, which is like a 7-hour day, like climbing so many thousands of feet up to Mount Fide. It was a brutal experience. And it was the first sign that my body was starting to push back on the training. And so I already knew in early May that I had hit my limit in terms of what my body could handle for volume, even with the rest that I'd had built in. So I had to make some adjustments and try and think about what I was going to do to be successful, right? If I'm going to continue this progress to Steamboat and to Leadville, what's going to make me successful, right? Not to really see how I'm in, but I did a little too much. So the next step was saying, okay, what am I doing all this volume for? And I decided to get into research mode. And this is one of the things that I think really separates peak performers from folks who are just out there doing the race, which is to say that peak performers are analyzing everything. You are turning over every stone. In the case of this research, I was talking to people in my professional network on LinkedIn. I was talking to teammates who've done the race. I was listening to the podcast. Fadi and Hadi do a great job with the podcast, break it down every single year, tons of nuggets inside there. I was in different forums online reading race reports. I went in Strava, and you'll see here, I'll pull it up for you right now, my Notion page, which is where I end up keeping everything I store and have lived inside this Notion page here. Right. So it started off by saying, hey, what am I going to do for the early part of the season? And I ended up going to Lutsen so I could improve my position in the corral. I talked to people and I took assiduous notes here. You can see all the items here. I went through and did the same for other calls. I figured out my accommodations. I had to figure out how I could do it. Looking at times, people were giving times, and I'd done some initial research here. Okay. And of course, all of this is available to Nutrition athletes. Talk about bike choices, equipment, did a mini camp. My nutrition planning is here. My pacing is here. I took all the aid stations. I've done them up. I figured out my bag up to Columbine, my bag down from Columbine, all the different things that I did. I researched, made tables, all of this stuff. And part of what this is really, I'm adjusting my watts, for example. What's the sea level equivalent of watts that I can put out at Leadville? What does that mean? How do I go through into it? Looking at different Strava files, like I said, doing the math, pulling up split, not to be redundant, but I wanted you to see that because I want you to understand that as you think about putting forth your best race, you have to become crazy informed. Right? You want to know everything about it, right? Just like you would do so professionally if you were going to go speak to a new venue or to a new audience, or maybe you're pitching a new client, you would do tons of research and background on that, right? You do the same with your races as well. If you are looking for someone who's had a peak performance, 9 times out of 10, they've got something like that research behind them. Or inverse is they've got 10 finishes that they're not happy with, that they suffered through, they did things wrong, and they've got a list of things that they shouldn't do. And they're trying to figure out what they should do based off of that. Inside Endurance Nation, our principle is to accelerate learning by engaging with other people who participated in the event, identifying people who have key information, taking all that information, putting it together, and then using it as a tool. So I started researching what the demands of the race would be and how I needed to process my efforts, what I was trying to be able to do on the day. That's what led me to have the mountain bike camp out in Minnesota, to do Lutsen as well, and to come out 3 days earlier here to Leadville so I could go ahead and spend time in recon, of course, et cetera. So the research was super important. It also helped me build a network of people that I could talk to or rely upon, whether I actually knew them or people that I could actually just find online. Oh, hey, this person was really articulate in this podcast. I'm going to go read anything else they have. I'll search them in Leadville and find more that they have. They became silent partners in this process of educating me and getting me ready. And that research was super critical. It shaped my understanding of the race external to what I wanted to achieve. And I think that's really important. When we get to the race or we're getting close to the race or we start setting goals, most of us, that's what we normally do. You're going to do a marathon. What finishing time do you want to have? Instead of saying you want to do a marathon, how much do you actually know about a marathon? Can you say more than 10 things about a marathon? And no, you can't say it's 26.2 miles. That doesn't count. So if you can't do that stuff, then you have to dive in and be ready to spend the time doing that research. And that for me was a big game changer, and something that I think really helped set the stage for me to be successful as I was going forward. Okay, so that was super critical. All right, let's talk a little bit about the pacing plan. I was actually not surprised to see that the winner this year actually used a pacing plan as well, taped to his top tube. It's been a thing in the past. Orange Mud didn't have them this year. At least I couldn't find them at the expo from what I understand, but I was able to make my own, and I'll pull that up here for you as well. So you can see, again, extreme level of dorkdom here in terms of how things are folding out. So what I was trying to capture with this pacing piece is I was trying to solve for the fact that it's a mountain bike race. It's not a triathlon. It's not a marathon. You can't just eat and drink when you want. There's only certain times during the race where you can, typically on the flats, maybe at the tops of some of the hills, but you really can't eat on the descents. They're crazy technical. You can't really eat and drink on the ups because they're crazy hard and you're at altitude as well. So how do you manage that? So what you'll see here is a progression of how do things work. I started here, so the bottom, and I'll zoom in on it a little bit so you can see, hopefully. Here we go. So it was like, okay, like the terrain of the course and say, when can we eat and drink? So the graded items here are off-road and these ones are road sections, right? So how do I eat and drink, eat, drink, draft, eat, drink? I can't eat and drink at the top of Columbine, eat, drink, draft. It's going to be hard to drink here. That was version 1. Version 2 was, okay, can't fit those words on my stem. So let's go ahead and color code it, keep the same terrain, color code it, and then use these blue triangles as an opportunity to say, this is when I can draft. So the idea being I'd have this on my stem. Okay, well, that was also way too enormous. So we had to throw that one out. So I was like, oh, it's a stem. It's got to be vertical. Look, I'm just sharing everything I did so you get it, right? So I was like, okay, we'll go vertical. We'll do it like this. Now count down the times. Also way too big. So I was like, okay, that's not going to work out. How do I make it easier to understand? So I did just straight up color coding. I'm not eating and drinking, and I am eating and drinking. This way I could look at this one and say, oh, when it's red, I'm not eating and drinking, and this is where the distances are. So I had a sense where it was, right? And I was like, okay, this is better than the earlier versions, but it's not perfect. So I was like, okay, that's not necessarily going to work. How do I make it better? So I tried to do some resizing and adjusting inside this space as well to make it a little clearer. Still not happy with that. So then I said, okay, how do I make this even more detailed, right? So I came into this version here and said, okay, these are the distances, right? From 9 to 14, I can eat and drink. From 15 to 22, I can't. To 40, the black numbers here represented places where I could be drafting and eating and drinking. The red ones were where I could not eat and drink. So I would have a sense. And I was like, okay, that's good. But the problem was it didn't show me my pacing plan as well. And I really wanted to see the pacing plan because I was targeting that sub 9 time. So in this case, I shrunkified it down and said, okay, on the right-hand side here, I'm going to have the distance and the time I should be there in order for me to make it. And that was based off of previous finishers and so on. And then I had the places where I could eat and drink on the side. At the end of the day, the eating and drinking happened more naturally, although I was very aware of how I was going to eat totally. I use this to figure out my total nutritional plan. But really, this right-hand side here of the pacing plan was what became so critical for me in terms of how I was going to execute the race. But the way that the race played out, for those of you who've read the race report, and I'll link it here below the video as well, is that it turned out that the race surprise got really hard. And by the time I got to this section here, I was quite far behind here at the mile mark. I was closer to 5 hours. I descended quickly and I was able to find some good groups and rebound in the middle. But I thought my race was still over. My back was super tight. I was exhausted. I didn't feel good. The altitude and the work was really taking its toll. So I went to the aid station at 74.5. Wasn't even looking at my computer anymore. I just dropped my bike, got 2 cups of Coke, had a banana, sat down, stretched on some cardboard, got up, had another Coke, got back on my bike, probably 3 minutes. And then I just said, you know what? If I'm about to start going, let me just take a look at my clock. And I look at my clock, and wouldn't you know it, it says 6:20 exactly. And I look at my stem, and it says, if you're here at this aid station at 6:20, you still have a chance. And so this sticker here really saved the day because at that stage of the game, you really can't, even despite all of your plans, you can't really get it right. And having that number there showed me that if I could continue pushing forward, I still had a chance. And that's really what kind of kept my head in the game. So that piece for me was super critical in terms of how I was going to do it. So the pacing plan became really critical. And how I did that, just so you know, was going through and taking a look at first a bunch of other people's files. I did a bunch of research on how people had raced the race to see where people were successful, where the strengths were, where the weaknesses were, how it played out. And then I went through and did some mapping here as well of people's times and some tables. I also looked at some splits as well from certain athletes. So I was able to combine all of that and verify what I wanted to do. But also, just as importantly, this research is what led me to understand that the pacing of Leadville is not even. It's not like going out and doing the same first and second half. The first half is really hard. It's hard aggressively at the start. It's hard because you're climbing up to 12,500 feet. The second half is technically faster, but you have to be ready to be fast. And I could see what that was. And the athletes who were able to achieve their goals are the ones who are able to still do work at the end of the day. The terrain sometimes doesn't allow you to ride, but you still can be on your game And I knew that I had to do something in those final miles to be ready. And I had everything dialed in for me. So it was pretty solid in that regard. Okay. All right. Two more to go. Resting into the race. This is something pretty counterintuitive. And I'll tell you, I heard lots of people out there on the course who were like, hey, this was so much easier 2 weeks ago when I did the Leadville stage race, man. Like, what's happened to me now? I don't understand why my legs feel terrible. Listen, racing and racing at altitude, racing mountain bike, racing at altitude. So we'll just take it. Racing mountain bikes harder, racing mountain bikes at altitude super hard. The toll of the race is massive. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I knew by the time I'd gotten to early May that my body was starting to push back on some of the volume. It had enough. I'd done too much work. So I tried to distribute the work more evenly and space things out. But that said, even in June and heading into early July, I was able to put up good weekend longer rides, but the fatigue was real. My lower back was really bothering me. And then my interval workouts during the week just suffered. I wasn't able to hit the threshold numbers that I could hit earlier in the year. I came back from my camps and my early season work. My FTP was up to 347 watts. I'm a big guy, so it's not that impressive. I was super excited, but when I was training going forward, I didn't have that number. I assumed I had lost fitness in the natural sort of impulsive way that we as athletes make decisions. And the truth actually was that I was just way too tired. I tracked my HRV online. I've been doing it since February, and it was pretty clear that my numbers were suppressed, and I just was ignoring the data here in front of me. I was able to connect with one of my teammates on the team had to come to Jesus with me because it's super easy to do for other people, but not so easy for yourself. And the bottom line was clear that I needed to rest. And so we structured a program that removed the longer rides on the weekends and the longer stuff during the week. So I was doing lots of long work and replaced it with quality work and then either rest days or super light aerobic days. I could still keep up running if I wanted, but the whole goal was to prioritize sleep and recovery and make sure that every session that I hit, I was ready to hit that session. If I wasn't hitting those numbers, then we had to step back and take a look and say, why can't you hit these numbers? What's the resistance here? What's the friction? Is it fatigue? Is it stress? Is it life? Is it travel? What's happening to you? How do we do that? And that actually started a few weeks out before the race. And for me, usually for something like an Ironman, I might go ahead and taper a couple weeks or some version of that. But when you think about it from this type of race, that's not at all what I did. Like I was like really in a tough spot and I needed to come back out of it in a fast way. And the best way to do that was to dial in and be able to be really smart about the work. So here, I'll take you over to the screen again so you can see the work in big. So here's Fitness and Fresh. This is just a standard Strava and paid subscription. You get a sense. So this is coming from early February and that early season build. Here you can see those weeks that are happening in March and really building the training stress up, like lots of fatigue, super fatigue. Then I rested and headed in, did my camp here in Mallorca. You can see here like massive work, right? That was a 190-mile race, I think. And then my subsequent work here in the Vuelta al Tide as well. And so you see the build, you see a down cycle, you see the big volume, and then I'm going into the rest of the year. And in an ideal world, I was going to be building up and then tapering down for the race. As it turns out, as I was building up, and you can see that early build cycle starts here. And so like late May, I gave myself some time and I was like, okay, late May, I'll do it. But as you can see, I just couldn't keep the build going. I was really struggling in here. The fatigue line just goes up and down. And you can see that the fitness is just plateaued across this work. No matter what work I was able to do, I had to take so much rest afterwards. It just wasn't happening, becoming frustrating. And basically by the end of July, or the middle of July, I should say, about 4 weeks out from race day, I knew something was wrong. And so we took it really far back. I rested, I did aerobic time, or I was doing these quality sessions as well. And that really changed the game in here. So this 4 week block helped. So in a way, one of the changes that I had to make for my Leadville to be great was to actually rest more. I'm 49 years old now. I just can't do all the work that I was able to do. And the real question comes when I think about it as a coach, how much of this work is actually contributing to your race performance? And I can honestly say everyone wants to talk about pacing or the roads were in great condition. The weather was excellent this year as well. All those things are true, but I was actually really well rested going racing, more rested than I'd ever been. And it was hard to do it. Like I really didn't want to rest that much. And I didn't think it was going to work. But as I reflected after the race, after all the stories were done and pictures were taken, that really the rest period was what allowed me to be my best in that space. If I'd shown up with an ounce more of fatigue on my system, I would have cracked. There's just no way because this race takes you and good, solid endurance challenges take you to a place where you are at your breaking point for a sustained period of time and opting out, stopping, giving up, having to stop, like your body just rejecting the work or the nutrition or whatever is right there. It's literally just within arm's reach. And being rested was super critical for me. It's something that I will take forward just from a performance standpoint as I age as an athlete and as many of our clients also age as well, really asking that question. Are you ready to do the work you need to do? Are you putting up the work that you should be putting up according to the data and the numbers that we have? And if you're not, then we have to take a look hard at what's happening because ultimately it's just like filling up your cup with too much. It doesn't matter. It's just, it runneth over. You're not absorbing it. It's no good. It's actually what's holding you back instead of helping you be your best. Okay. And then last but not least, I would go to something that's not super sexy, but I think was a really important piece for me. And that was nutritional excellence. One of the strengths that I think having a diverse background of sports allows athletes to do in new events is to tap into that wealth of knowledge that you personally have about what does and doesn't work for you. In my case, getting ready for Leadville, I was able to tap into my Ironman experience of nutrition and pacing. Speaking of nutrition, hold on, excuse me, coming after me here at the altitude. When I think about what nutrition means in an Ironman context, we're basically using the bike as the main mechanism to get all the calories you need in to not only survive the bike, but also to survive the majority of the life. And so success means that we have a plan that we put into place and we test it. That means eating and drinking in intervals. And the way we start inside Endurance Nation is we start with basically what your fluid needs are, determine what you're going to be eating, and figure out how many calories that has. So whatever your choice is, what are the electrolytes, what are the calories? Great. We look at it and we say, how many more calories do we need to add? We have blocks, gels, bars, whatever else, waffles, bananas, potatoes, whatever it is, whatever we're going to add to your plan has to fill in the gap, get your calories up to the place where you can sustain the work that you want to be able to do. A lot of that's based on your lean body mass and your goals for race day, how hard you're going to work. Even if you may be small, if you're going to work at a high rate, you need calories. Just simply the way that things work. People who tell you that you don't need calories to race at a high level are really deluding themselves and not doing you any favors. If you're going to do a long distance event, it's hard. You can't even sit at your desk for 9 hours without eating something. How could you possibly race a bike for 9 hours and really not eat? It just doesn't make any sense. But when we get in the context of putting ourselves in these endurance challenges, we often just pick up what other people are saying and say, that sounds like you do it and you look like that, or you have done this thing. It must be the right thing to do. And really, I encourage athletes when it comes to nutrition to test their personal baselines. And we do that all season inside Endurance Nation, not only over the course of a sweat test early in the training plan, but 2 race rehearsal workouts as well. We have a chance to take your nutrition plan and execute it, see what worked, what didn't work, and we can toggle some switches. In my case, I was able to use a Camelback setup, bottle on my down tube, both with Gatorade Endurance. I learned over the course of the year I was using noon, wasn't enough calories for me. I needed the Gatorade Endurance. And I was also able to vary my nutrition as well, emphasizing caffeine later in the day, in the second half of the day, in the early parts of the day, making sure I was getting in some more solid foods using power bars and a couple gels, and then transitioning to caffeinated gels and caffeinated blocks as well. I also had some Coke starting at the top of Columbine at about hour 5, and continued having Coke at the aid stations going forward. They're about every 90 minutes to 2 hours apart. So it wasn't a ton of Coke, but it was really helpful. But the reason why I think the nutrition piece is really key, and something that I believe people overlook generally, is that having great nutrition allowed me to cognitively do the math on what was happening to me at mile 74.5 and then make a decision. Right. So I was actually able to add clarity. My brain had enough calories, glycogen, to actually do the math. When oftentimes at that length of an event, people's brains just check out and they can't do the math. Right. And the second part of it was, once my brain had made that decision, my body could actually do, not because I just decided to eat a gel and go. That gel is not going to get into my body for at least 30 or 45 minutes in a meaningful way. I had to have been eating and drinking really well all day. And I was able to do that through my consistency in my training program. And that's something that I think is really massive. When athletes run into tough times later in the day, a lot of times it's a combination. It's the intersection of both physical fatigue and mental fatigue. And a lot of times it's low blood sugar. And that's where those feelings of despair come in. And it's not that you should be mentally tough or super stronger or just fight those demons. It's really meant to be an opportunity to look into it and say, how did I not give my body enough fuel to be in a place where I could be okay now? I'm training for a 9-hour or 10-hour or 12-hour or 20-hour event. I need to be able to eat things sustained over time to get there. You don't need world-class rigor in the early part of your season, but it should be a process that you're working towards incrementally over time, getting smarter about the products you need, learning your lessons as you go through the notes in your training journal, and then bringing that A game of excellence as a layer on top of your race experience, whatever that race may be. Whatever challenge you do pick, there's a lot of different variables. And I hope that this conversation today here, and my final word to you, gives you a sense of how things actually are super critical for your day. It's a lot of times people will talk about, oh, hey, what's the, put it up here for you on the screen again. People will say, what tires are you running? They'll say, how are you losing weight? They'll say, like, how are you going to get into a group and draft? And we'll think about all things that are related to purchasing things. We'll think about miracle tactics on race day. We'll think about parts. If I could just get over St. Kevin's in the beginning and really crush it, I'll be in a new group and things will be great. And those are all things that are really out of your control, right? So you can buy new tires, but they may or may not be fast. It's hard to say. You still have to race them. You have to pedal the bike. You can talk about getting over with a group, but it may be so costly that it hurts you later on. That group may not materialize. At the end of the day, really staying focused on what you can control and doing the work required is the piece of the puzzle that sets things forward. So when people say, oh, Coach Patrick went out there and broke 9 hours in his first Ironman. He's just some kind of machine. The machine element that I would highlight is, yes, I'm willing to do the work. Yes, I'm going to do tons of research about it. Yes, I'm going to use my teammates and their knowledge and understanding. I'm going to put myself through rehearsals so I can learn. And I'm going to create the pacing and nutrition plans and be successful. It's a process that we've got bundled up inside of NeuroStation that we use. And it's really what set my performance and allowed me to achieve this goal that, honestly, while it made sense on paper and it looked good in little pieces, I personally still didn't believe it until mile 74.5. And then I still had to ride whatever that was, 2.5, 240 to the finish line to still make it happen. And it was a really tough and challenging experience, super rewarding, but only made possible through lots of work, consistency, learning from my mistakes, and getting better. So I hope this is helpful for you. If you've got questions about some of the items that we used earlier or that I showed here, definitely reach out to me. You can find me on Twitter. Those of you on the team, find me in the chat. You guys can answer in the comments here below, whatever it may be. But I hope this proves helpful. And as you think about your breakthrough performance going forward, whatever that may be, remember, it's all about the fundamentals and the basics, and really you spending the time learning what's going to make a difference for you through research and through practice. And if you do that, you're going to really be set up to have a fantastic day. All right, folks, thanks for tuning in. Coach Patrick, signing out.